The vibration of the phone against the antique oak table sounded like a drill pressing into a raw nerve, shattering the pristine silence I had spent 72 years trying to find. Just moments before, I had been standing before the bay window of my cottage, watching the morning mist roll off the Blue Ridge Mountains, holding a ceramic mug of tea that warmed my arthritic fingers. I was Alara Vance, a woman who had finally, after a lifetime of existing as a footnote in other people's biographies, decided to write her own chapter. At 72, having buried a husband who commanded the room and raised a daughter who commanded my life, I had cashed out every cent of my existence to buy The Willow, a modest 2-bedroom sanctuary with a wraparound porch and a garden that smelled of damp earth and possibility. But as I looked at the caller ID, seeing the name Jessica flashing on the screen, the warmth in my chest evaporated, replaced by that familiar, icy knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach for decades. I swiped the screen, forcing a lightness into my voice that I did not feel. "Hello, darling," I said, the maternal reflex kicking in before my brain could stop it. I expected a quick check-in, perhaps a belated congratulation on the move-in which had happened only 3 days ago. Instead, Jessica's voice pierced the line, sharp and breathless, devoid of pleasantries. "Mom, listen to me. We are on the highway. We will be there in about 90 minutes. The sentence hung in the air, suspended and heavy. I gripped the edge of the table. "Here?" "But Jessica, I just unpacked the last box yesterday. The painters are still touching up the trim." "It is not a good time." She let out a sigh that sounded more like a hiss of steam. "Mom, stop being difficult. This isn't a request. It's a family emergency of sorts. David's entire side of the family needed a getaway. Their rental in the Carolinas fell through at the last minute. Something about a double booking, and I told them, don't worry, my mother just bought a charming place in the mountains. It's perfect. We are saving the vacation. You should be happy to host. It is a chance to show off that little investment of yours that you were so secretive about." My knees gave out, and I sank onto the hard wooden chair. "Who is coming, Jessica?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She rattled off the list with the casual indifference of someone ordering a sandwich. "It's us, obviously. Then David's brother, Ryan, and his wife, plus their 3 boys, Aunt Linda and Uncle Jerry. Oh, and David's cousin, that girl Brenda. She is bringing her fiancé and her 2 toddlers, and a few others might join in a separate car. Roughly 22 of us, maybe 24. We need you to get lunch started. Nothing fancy, just something hearty. We are starving." The line went dead before I could utter a single word of protest. I sat there in the silence that was once my friend and now felt like the calm before a nuclear detonation. 22 people. My cottage, my sanctuary, was less than 1,500 square feet. I had one guest room with a single twin bed, intended for the occasional visit from an old friend, not an invading army. I walked to the kitchen, my sanctuary of cream-colored cabinets and butcher block counters, and opened the refrigerator. And it was a portrait of solitary contentment. A carton of almond milk, half a loaf of sourdough bread, a dozen eggs, some artisan cheese, and a basket of fresh strawberries. It was enough for me for a week. It was not enough to feed 24 people for an hour. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in my throat. This wasn't just about logistics, it was about the erasure of my boundaries. For 40 years of marriage to Robert, my needs were secondary. I moved where he wanted, cooked what he liked, dressed how he preferred. When he passed, I spent 2 years mourning not just him, but the realization that I didn't know who I was without him. Buying the Willow was my act of rebellion. It was my declaration of self. And now, Jessica, who had called my purchase a senile waste of inheritance, was treating it like a free roadside motel. I checked my wallet. After the closing costs, the movers, and the necessary repairs to the roof, I was living on a razor-thin margin until my pension check cleared next month. I had exactly $280 in cash and a debit card that I was terrified to use. How does one feed an army on a pauper's budget? But the conditioning was deep. The voice of my mother, and her mother before her, whispered in my ear, "A good woman provides. A good mother never says no. A good hostess endures." I grabbed my keys and drove the winding road into town, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The town of Oak Haven was quaint, expensive, and slow. I ran through the aisles of the local grocery store like a woman possessed, bypassing the organic produce I loved and grabbing bags of generic rice, beans, pasta, and canned sauce. I calculated every penny in my head, sweat prickling my hairline. I bought the cheapest ground meat, the industrial-sized bags of chips, jugs of sugary drink mix instead of juice. When the cashier rang up the total, $245, I felt physically ill. I had $35 left to my name for the next 2 weeks. I arrived back at the cottage with 20 minutes to spare. I became a whirlwind of activity, boiling massive pots of water, chopping onions until my eyes streamed with tears that were not entirely from the fumes. I wasn't cooking with love. I was cooking with fear. I was trying to purchase their approval with labor, a transaction I had been making my entire life without ever receiving a receipt. The sound of tires crunching on gravel announced their arrival. It wasn't just one car. It was a convoy. SUVs and sedans pulled onto my carefully tended grass, ignoring the driveway. Doors flew open, and the noise hit me like a physical blow. Shrieking children, barking laughter, the thud of heavy suitcases hitting the ground. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped onto the porch, forcing a smile that felt like a mask of dried clay. "Mom," Jessica yelled from the driver's seat of her luxury SUV. "Don't just stand there. Grab the cooler from the trunk. It's heavy." There was no "hello," no "how are you," no "the house is beautiful." I walked down the steps, my knees aching, and reached for the cooler. David, my son-in-law, walked past me carrying nothing but a bag of golf clubs. "Looks small, Ilara," he muttered, looking at the house. "Hope the AC works better than it looks." The invasion was swift and total. Within 15 minutes, my sanctuary was gone. Suitcases were piled in the hallway, scuffing the freshly painted walls. Children were running laps around my kitchen island, their sticky hands touching the countertops I had polished that morning. Brenda, the cousin I barely knew, was already changing a diaper on my dining room table. "Aunt Ilara," Brenda called out, not bothering to look up. "We forgot wipes. You have some, right? Also, the baby needs lactose-free milk." I didn't see any in the fridge. I stood in the center of my living room, holding a ladle, feeling invisible. "I don't have baby supplies, Brenda," I said softly. "I live alone." "Well, you can run to the store, can't you?" She said it as if I were the concierge. "We are going to be unpacking. We need lunch first," roared Ryan, David's brother, slapping his stomach. "What's on the menu, Ilara?" "Smells like cafeteria food." I served the pasta and meat sauce in bowls that didn't match, scrambling to find enough utensils. I ended up eating standing up in the kitchen because there were no chairs left. I watched them eat. They devoured the food like locusts, complaining between bites. "The sauce is a bit bland, isn't it?" Aunt Linda whispered loudly to Jessica. "Probably cheap ingredients. You know how your mother gets with money." Jessica rolled her eyes, a gesture she had perfected at 13 and weaponized at 40. "Mom, really? We have guests. You could have made a roast, or at least bought some wine. There is absolutely no alcohol in this house. It's depressing." I swallowed a lump of dry pasta. "I didn't know you were coming until an hour ago, Jessica, and I don't drink." David chimed in, leaning back in my antique rocking chair, the one I was afraid to sit in myself for fear of wearing it out. "Look, Ilara, we're here for 2 weeks. We need to get this place up to standard. The Wi-Fi is practically non-existent. I can't stream the game. And where are we all sleeping?" "There are 2 bedrooms. We'll take the master, obviously," Jessica announced. "David has a bad back. The kids can camp in the living room. Ryan and Linda can take the guest room. Mom, you have that pull-out sofa in the den, right? Or an air mattress?" My mouth opened, but no sound came out. The master bedroom. My room. The room with the view of the valley. The room where I had spent the last 3 nights sleeping in the center of the bed, limbs stretched out, marveling at the space. They were evicting me from my own bed, in my own house. That night, I lay on the lumpy cushions of the old sofa in the drafty den, listening to the house groan under the weight of 24 strangers. I could hear the television blaring in the living room, the laughter, the sound of the refrigerator door opening and closing. I stared at the ceiling, tears finally leaking from the corners of my eyes. I wasn't crying because I was on the sofa. I was crying because I realized that to them, I wasn't a person. I was an appliance. I was a resource to be mined until empty. The next morning, the sun rose over Oakhaven, but I found no joy in it. The house was a disaster zone. Empty soda cans littered the porch. Mud was tracked across the hardwood floors. I went to the kitchen to make coffee, my one solace, only to find the canister empty. "Morning, Alara," Ryan said, scratching his chest as he walked in. "We used the last of the coffee. You'll need to get more. And get the good stuff this time. That generic brand gave me a headache." "And eggs," Brenda shouted from the other room. "The kids ate all the eggs. We need pancakes. Go get syrup, mix, bacon, lots of bacon, and fresh fruit." I looked at them. I looked at my empty wallet on the counter. "I have no money," I said, my voice trembling. "I spent everything I had on yesterday's dinner." The room went silent, but it wasn't a sympathetic silence. It was an annoyed one. "Oh, Mom, don't start the poor mouth routine," Jessica sighed, walking in with her phone glued to her ear. "Dad left you plenty. You just bought this house. You're telling me you're broke? That's just embarrassing. Stop being stingy. We are family." "It's not stinginess, Jessica," I said, feeling a heat rise in my cheeks. "It is math. I am on a fixed income." David laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Then put it on a credit card, Alara. We'll pay you back, eventually. Or consider it your contribution. We drove all the way here, paid for gas. The least you can do is feed us." They handed me a list. It was 3 pages long. Steaks for the grill, craft beer, specific brands of cereal, sunscreen, bug spray, pool floats. I didn't even have a pool. They wanted to go to the lake. The estimated cost was easily $600. I took the list and walked out the door. I sat in my car, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the world were closing in. I started the engine and drove toward town, but I didn't go to the supermarket. I couldn't. I physically couldn't swipe a card I knew would be declined, or worse, plunge me into debt that would take me years to pay off. I parked in front of a small coffee shop called The Roasted Bean and went inside, counting out $3 in loose change to buy a small black coffee. I sat in the corner, looking out the window, watching the happy tourists, wondering when my life had become a prison sentence. Rough morning? The voice was smoky, refined. I looked up to see a woman sitting at the adjacent table. She was about my age, perhaps a few years younger, with silver hair cut in a sharp, stylish bob and wearing a silk scarf that looked like it cost more than my car. She was reading a thick book and peering at me over reading glasses. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you," I stammered, wiping my eyes. "You're not disturbing me. You're intriguing me," she said, closing her book. "You look like a woman who is contemplating either a felony or a breakdown. I'm Iris. I live in the yellow Victorian down the road from that cottage you just bought. I saw the invasion force arrive yesterday." I let out a shaky breath. "It's my daughter and her husband and everyone." Iris nodded, picking up her cup. "And they have displaced you. They are eating your food, sleeping in your bed, and treating you like the hired help." "Am I close?" I stared at her. "How did you—" "Honey, I was a divorce attorney in Chicago for 40 years. I know the look of a woman who is being bled dry by the people who are supposed to love her." She leaned in, her eyes intense and intelligent. "The question is, Alara, why are you letting them?" Because they are family, I whispered, the excuse tasting like ash in my mouth. Iris scoffed. That is a biological fact, not a suicide pact. Family is who respects you. What they are doing isn't love, it's predation. You are the host organism. She reached into her oversized leather tote bag and pulled out a legal pad and a fountain pen. Tell me, did they invite themselves? Yes. Did they offer to pay? No. Are they damaging your property? There is mud on the walls and they broke a lamp this morning. Iris uncapped the pen. Excellent. That's property damage. Now listen to me. You have two choices. You can go back there, buy their steaks with money you don't have, and spend the next 10 years resentful and broke. Or you can reclaim your life. Right now. Today. But how? They won't listen to me. Jessica. She has a way of making me feel small. Then don't speak their language, Iris said, smiling a smile that was all teeth and predatory grace. Speak mine. Speak the language of contracts, liabilities, and commerce. For the next hour, Iris didn't just give me advice, she gave me a spine. She drafted a document on that legal pad, her handwriting looping and sharp. She explained the laws of tenancy, the definition of a guest versus a squatter, and the concept of fair market value. She sent me to the bank not to withdraw money, but to print out a statement. She sent me to the local printer to type up the document she had handwritten. When I drove back to the Willow, the sun was high in the sky. My heart was still hammering, but it was a different rhythm now. It wasn't the erratic beat of panic. It was the steady drum of a soldier marching into battle. I walked into the house. The chaos was in full swing. The TV was blaring. Someone had spilled orange soda on my cream rug. David was complaining loudly about the lack of lunch. Finally, Jessica shouted from the couch, not looking up from her magazine. Did you get the steaks? The boys are starving. I didn't answer. I walked to the television and pulled the plug from the wall. The silence that followed was sudden and shocking. Everyone froze. David looked up, his mouth half open. Alara, what the hell? He snapped. I was watching that. I stood in the center of the room, clutching my clipboard. I didn't buy steaks, I announced, my voice steady, though my knees shook beneath my skirt. In fact, I didn't buy anything. Jessica stood up, her face flushing pink. Mom, are you senile? We gave you a list. We have 20 people to feed. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the selfishness etched into her brow, the entitlement in her posture, and I realized Iris was right. This wasn't love. I have spent the last 2 hours reviewing my finances, I said, holding up the bank statement. In the last 24 hours, I have spent nearly $300 on food that you have consumed. I have $30 left. I cannot support you. So what? David sneered. You want a handout? Fine, here. He tossed a $20 bill at me. It fluttered to the floor. Go get some burgers. I didn't pick it up. No, this isn't about a handout. This is about a transaction. Since you have decided to treat my home like a hotel and me like the staff, we are going to formalize that arrangement. I handed Jessica the document Iris had helped me draft. It was titled, Short-Term Lodging and Service Agreement. What is this? Jessica asked, squinting at the paper. It is a bill, I said, and a contract. Since you arrived uninvited, you are categorized as commercial guests. The rate for the master suite is $200 a night. The guest room is $150. Floor space is $50 per person. Meals are $30 per head per meal. Cleaning fees are separate. The room erupted. It was a cacophony of outrage. Aunt Linda gasped. Ryan threw his hands up. David looked like he was going to explode. You are charging your own family? Jessica screamed. This is sick, Mom. Dad would be rolling in his grave. Your father, I cut in, my voice rising for the first time, worked himself into an early grave to ensure I was safe. He did not work so that his brother's nephew's cousins could treat his widow like a servant. I continued. Reading from the sheet. Retroactive to yesterday, the total current balance for lodging and food is $1,200. If you wish to stay for the full 2 weeks, the estimated cost is $14,000, payable in advance. You're insane, David spat, standing up and looming over me. We aren't paying you a dime. You're an old woman living alone. You need us. Who's going to take care of you when you fall? Who's going to call you on your birthday? I looked him in the eye. I would rather be alone and solvent than surrounded by vultures and bankrupt. David turned to Jessica. Let's go. She's lost her mind. We aren't staying here. Good, I said. Checkout time is in 30 minutes. Anything left behind will be donated to the local shelter. The next half hour was a blur of angry packing. The insults flew thick and fast. I was called selfish, crazy, bitter, a witch. Jessica threw clothes into her bag, sobbing dramatic tears. You are destroying this family, she wailed. You will never see your grandchildren again. I watched her, feeling a profound sadness, but no regret. Jessica, I said softly, you didn't bring the grandchildren to see me. You brought them to a free daycare while you drank wine by a lake. If you want to see me, you can come back, alone, for a weekend, when you are invited. But you will never, ever bring a tour bus to my door again. As they loaded the cars, Iris pulled into the driveway in her vintage convertible. She leaned against the hood, watching the exodus with a satisfied smirk. She didn't say a word to them, but her presence was a reinforcement. She was the witness to my dignity. David slammed the trunk of his car. I hope you enjoy your big empty house, Alara. You're going to die alone in it. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had worn in days. I plan to live in it, David. Very happily. I watched the convoy recede down the dusty road, the cloud of gravel dust settling slowly. The silence returned to the willow, but it wasn't the hollow silence of before. It was a rich, luxurious silence. I walked back inside. The floor was dirty. The rug was stained, and the air smelled of stale chips. But it was mine. I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning. I scrubbed the mud. I vacuumed the crumbs. I threw open the windows to let the mountain breeze flush out the scent of entitlement. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of violet and burnt orange, I brewed a fresh pot of tea, using the last of my tea bags, and sat on the porch. Iris walked over, carrying a basket. I brought dinner, she said, setting it down on the small table between the rockers. Roasted chicken, fresh salad from my garden, and a bottle of Pinot Noir. I know you said you don't drink, but today might be an exception. I laughed, a sound that felt rusty but good. I think you might be right. We sat there as the stars began to poke through the twilight. I took a sip of the wine. It was tart and complex. You were brave today, Alara, Iris said. Most people never break the chains. They just drag them until they can't move. It hurts, I admitted. My chest feels empty. That's not emptiness, Iris corrected. That's space. You just cleared out all the clutter. Now you get to decide what you fill it with. In the months that followed, I filled it with life. I joined a pottery class in town, discovering that my arthritic hands could still mold beauty from clay. I turned the guest room into a studio, paint spattering the floor I used to worry about keeping pristine. I made friends. Iris, of course, and others from the library and the garden club. Jessica called after 3 months. Her voice was stiff, testing the waters. She needed money for a car repair. I told her no. She got angry, but she didn't scream. She realized the dynamic had shifted. The Bank of Mom was closed. The hotline of guilt had been disconnected. 6 months later, she came to visit. Just her and the kids. She stayed for 2 days. She brought groceries. She washed her own dishes. It wasn't perfect. The warmth was tentative, the conversation cautious, but it was respectful. She looked at me not as a resource, but as a woman with boundaries. One evening, standing in front of that same bathroom mirror where I had once wiped away tears of fear, I looked at my reflection. My wrinkles were deeper, my hair whiter. but the eyes staring back were clear. They belonged to Alara Vance, the woman who lived in the house on the hill, the woman who painted sunsets and drank wine with her neighbor, the woman who learned that the most expensive thing in the world is not a house or a car, but your own peace of mind. And once you buy it back, you never ever let anyone sell it out from under you again. I walked out to the porch, where the night air whispered through the pines. The phone inside rang. I let it ring. It could wait. The moon was rising, and I had a view to admire.